Welcome to the recruitment curry show. Today we have Jesse Tinsley, the CEO and founder of Job Mobz, recruiting expert, and who's going to be enlightening us about scaling through acquisition. Jesse, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Fantastic. So Jesse, obviously, it's dynamic situation in the market all over. Especially the states and then Europe with the recruiting industry. And while we've seen a massive demand last year, for recruiting services, and then which was more pent up, and lots of companies hiring, we are seeing a totally different situation, as we speak. And while there are lots of companies who are, trying to sustain, and obviously there are lots of companies trying to thrive. Uh, One of the best topics, discussed in boardrooms is how do we scale, and acquisitions is one of the factors which lots of companies are considering. So,
Yeah,
yeah, keen to know your
yes,
thoughts.
yeah. So I think with acquisitions, it's interesting because there was a ton of M&A interest the last 5 years, right? When the market was extremely hot, um, there's not a week that goes by that we get multiple outreach ourselves to be acquired by companies. We had multiple acquisition, like unsolicited offers in the last few years as well. I think it's kind of like the old Warren Buffett saying. It's like, basically be greedy when others are fearful, and fearful when others are greedy. I think that rings true in this market as well, right? There's a lot of pain in the market for folks that didn't prepare for 2023 accordingly, or just got caught in unfortunate circumstances. So I think there's a ton of merit going out and scaling through acquisition right now.
So what's the situation like? In terms of the trends, are you seeing lots of companies, up for sale, or are you seeing lots of businesses, struggling to actually, get through these situations for various reasons, right from staffing to funding to, obviously to cash flow, number of things. So what are you seeing right now, in the market?
I think it's a mix of all things, right? So I think there's lots of folks that levered up with a lot of debt the last couple of years, and debt's fine, used in the right dynamic, right? Like very common in real estate and lots of other areas where you can get strategic leverage to buy homes, and that's great. I think with businesses, at least in this recruiting space, a bit more risky on the SMB side, right? If you're under 10 million in revenue and you're taking on large loans, like it's not unheard of. We've talked because we're obviously acquiring other firms right now. And we'll be announcing some as soon as next week that will close on. And I think the big thing that you're seeing across the market, not speaking to those companies in particular, is just that folks took on debt and the market did a complete 180, right? And you should be a lot more conservative with debt. I think a lot of owners and founders will, moving forward, especially if you're under a certain threshold of revenue, because we've seen companies go from 20, 30, 40, 50 recruiting consultants out to zero, right? And that's just
It's a massive drop.
massive drop, right? Can't really predict that. So yeah, that's kind of what we're seeing. It's still a lot of really, really good businesses doing quality work, and I think there's a lot of efficacy to merging with companies that have a good brand, right? If I was in your shoes, like go find your biggest competitor in India, and I would go merge with them, right? Like and build a roll up, right? I think there's lots of merit to that, because you can get saved. Basically, like down market, you can save on efficiency, right? There's efficiency savings on operations, right? But to run a recruiting firm of 20 people operationally costs about the same as 100 people, right? So there's not much of a difference from a back office perspective, from HR, legal, finance, right? And then the same thing's true with like software synergies and savings there, right? You have larger volume, you're going to get discounts. So it's a lot cheaper to go and merge, and a lot of synergies with customers and everything else, and redundancy and capacity planning in this RPO space to go do that. And I think we'll see a lot of that over the next 24 months.
Wow, that's massive. So in terms of the sectors, are you saying recruiting companies from specific sectors like tech or manufacturing, which are sort of looking at this avenue, or is this sort of sector agnostic? Is this all across the spectrum?
Um, this is it's definitely unique to certain industries that are hit harder, right? So tech, we've seen a massive drop in the last year, right? You've seen those companies drop from 50 to 90%, at least in the U.S. markets. Same with like crypto. So a lot of these companies have, we've seen even with our customers, without naming anybody, there are a couple thousand people and they've dropped to 5 internal recruiters, right? That's unheard of. Like you can't even, let's just take a low attrition number of, 10 or 15%, that's a couple hundred people, and five recruiters aren't going to be able to fill a couple hundred engineer roles if they want to
Definitely not.
backfill those, especially when the market starts to tick back at all. So I think there's going to be a huge uptick with after 2020 and 2022 layoffs that we've seen. You're going to see companies do a lot of augmented support. And I don't think that I think people might say that I'm shilling RPO, but it's really not the case. I think it could be consulting recruiters directly, it could be RPO, can be recruiting on demand, but some type of augmented workforce that can flex up or down based on the market dynamics, I think is very, very wise moving forward, just with kind of how volatile the markets are.
Yeah, and then, I think I can resonate to that, because we are seeing lots of demand where from staffing agencies where they are literally inundated with the number of applications, and their recruiters, they don't have enough time to sift through the applications, and then that's where they're looking for support. So like you mentioned, there are a number of avenues, not just RPOs, but recruiters can support in sort of number of ways. So in terms of the best practices, Jesse, for acquisitions, could you share your experience in terms of how should companies go about, how do they start? We lost you there, Jesse.
Sorry, it's on mute.
Sure.
Saying that a lot of it's relationship based, and so I think it's interesting because it's just like recruiting, right? Like the best recruiters obviously have the skill set, but they also have the network, right? So like if I started a software engineering search tomorrow, right, I know 5 best people that I just call up, right, in the Bay Area. Same thing with M&A, right? You want to have those relationships formed years in advance with all the different M&A brokers or the potential like strategic buyers. This is going to help make like your life a lot easier, as opposed to like in a down market when they're getting a ton of inbound, right? Like I think we announced that we're going to strategically go buy companies, and we've had 36 companies reach out to us in the last month with the recruiter.com news, and then the strategic partnership we signed there, and then making some of those announcements. We've had just an outpouring, which is very flattering. But the folks that are kind of rise to the top there for us are folks we already know, right, and have established relationships with. And so that's the first step, is I start building those relationships long before you need them, right, or want to do it. It's definitely the first step if you're looking to sell your business. Other than that, I think there's lots of other things you can do that'll help prepare your business, like audited financials and starting to go through stuff like that. But that's probably the best thing, is focus on the relationship piece. Obviously, make sure you're doing it when your revenue is at least increasing. You don't want to be going into decline, like a deflationary revenue decline. That's going to be tough to sell. And again, I would mainly pivot. Like, there's a lot of horror stories with like private equity firms. I think strategics generally going to be a better outcome for many owners, because the private equity playbook, as I've learned earlier, my crew, when we had an offer back in the day, is they'll say like, hey, we'll give you $1 million, right, whatever it is, and they'll string you along for 3 months. You go through all the painstaking diligence, and then at the very end they'll be like, by the way, we'll give you $1 million, but, and then they'll put like some crazy term in where it's like, oh, you only get 10% up front, and then you have to earn out the next 90%, right? Or whatever it is. So they'll flip the script on you pretty quick. So.
Right. Sure. So obviously, one key takeaway on this point is that start networking before you actually need it. So start now. If you're thinking 3 years down the line, or whatever time down the line.
Yeah, just like job search, right? The recruiter should know, right? Recruiting firm owners should know this better than most. Yeah, you need to network for your next job basically before you need it. Same thing. Same thing is true of acquisitions.
And then, when it comes to evaluating, of course, it's the numbers, that matters the most. But apart from the numbers and the billing figures, what other factors are of utmost importance?
Yeah, so I think like there's a there's a few things that are like going to be really important for any of those. Is like how you structure your contracts can make a huge difference. In fact, I've advised a few consultancies that weren't in the recruiting space, just in different like ancillary business services, whether it be marketing or design. I was telling them how they should structure their contracts so that actually when they go to sell in the next couple of years, that the firm will be worth 200, 300% more just because of the way they structured their contracts. It's stuff like that that makes huge valuation differences that most people wouldn't even think about. And it's really minor things your customers won't even push back on. And an example would be just like putting retained money into different payment formats in your contracts. Most people just bill net 30. You can get pretty creative with stuff. And so that's one of the things is like how you structure your contracts. Another is going to be like actual net profits and how like efficient you're running the business. Basically, growing a business versus selling a business are two very different mindsets. My best recommendation there is going to be focus on what you normally would focus on within the business, even when you're selling, because otherwise if it doesn't happen, at least you're in a good spot because it can be quite distracting for many owners.
Sure. So, I know this is personal probably to every business owner, but if somebody's thinking of selling, their staffing business, recruiting agency, what size, do you think, they should consider before actually, venturing out, into this avenue?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know if there's a size per se. I think it's going to matter again going back to the relationship piece. But there's like a local maximum in this space where a lot of firms get stuck between about 2 and 5 million in revenue. Um, and that is probably a good size to go do like the first thing we talked about, which is go merge with another firm that's doing 2 to 5 million.
Yeah.
And then like I think the other option is once you've done that, then like if you're at 8-10 million plus, you can go get acquired pretty easily. Obviously, it's easier and easier as you go up market, but that'd be my recommendation. There's a lot of firms that fall into 1 to 5 million in revenue that kind of get stuck there.
Right. And then there's another interesting angle to this, which is negotiating a good deal.
Yeah.
So I'm sure a lot of people will be interested in hearing about what are the best tips.
Yeah.
For,
Well, yeah, it's a great question. It's kind of like it's tricky, right? So I think the first you have to like figure out unpack like what's a good deal, but I think it's also if you're staying on as a founder, it's really not getting the best. I think it's getting an integrative solution, right? It's like if I was buying your company, Katan, I'm like, oh well, what does that look like from a fair deal for each side, right? 50-50, like say if we're 50, like maybe you get 51% more value and I get 49. I think something like that. You try to meet in the middle because you have to work with this buyer for the next 2 to 3 years. So if you over negotiate, over promise, and under deliver, it's not going to work out well for anyone, right? Like there's some high percentage of companies that go through acquisition end up in litigation, but part of that is founders or buyers over promising, right, and then under delivering on the actual terms of the deal. And so I think the biggest thing is just like try to come up with a fair deal, especially with like strategics or people you have a relationship with. I think trust goes a long way. If I was selling my company, I would go with a company that I trusted, like for 10% less, over a company offering more money to do the same thing, right? So I think that's a big thing is the relationship piece, more so like the money, making sure like your customers are taken care of, your recruiters, right, and then also like that you can work with them yourself, right? There's like multiple factors there. So.
And then, you mentioned, about the contract. So, the other thing that you really need is clean books of accounts.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that you should. Yeah, if you're starting to get like higher on the revenue spectrum that we talked about, like 8 to 10 plus million, I think you can definitely start to get up. You can just pay for audited financials if you want to exit in the next year or two. That'll save you a lot of time and effort and be really, really good. It is a little expensive, but probably worth it in the end. It'll make your life just so much easier during diligence.
Yeah, you don't want to cut any corners there.
Yeah, yep. We've seen
And
that
then,
recently with what was the acquisition? I'm blanking on the bank. What bank acquired the software startup? You know what I'm talking about? Where the CEO fraudulently increased user data, right? I have to look at the name, put it in the show notes, but blanking. Yeah, it was an interesting situation. Similar thing. Obviously, diligence wasn't that deep, and I think it was J.P. Morgan Chase that bought them, but I could be wrong. But anyways, I think huge investigation and facing criminal charges for fraud. Obviously, do not do that, but I think it goes without saying. But yeah, there's interesting stories on both sides of deals not working out. So again, I think the biggest takeaway is that I would build relationships, work with people. The journey is just beginning on acquisition, right? So like it's like only like the first part of that company's journey in a lot of cases. So be
of
a
course.
decade or two run thereafter. So
So, you mentioned, at the start of the conversation, Jesse, that you've gone through some, acquisitions recently as well. You had a number of inquiries. Can you share some examples, some case studies of, what's the process like? What's the experience like for the, both the parties?
yeah, yeah. So let's say the process generally would look like you're. Hold on one sec. My browser decided to shut down. Uh, yes, the process is pretty straightforward. If you were to like reach out, we generally, if we didn't know each other, it's just a normal conversation, kind of talk about your business conceptually, sign a mutual NDA, do a deeper dive, try to understand the nuts and bolts of it and how it would possibly work. Functionally, let's say that those 2 hours of calls combined go well, might do a deeper dive into like financials or something like that, move to an LOI, come up with like a baseline agreement for a deal. It's usually like a pretty lightweight letter of intent to purchase, and some type of valuation and some terms that you discuss with the owner. And then from there, you basically go through like due diligence, which is depending on who you're working with, could take anywhere from 2 to 4 months. And that's where you're going to want to have all your accounting and finance buttoned up. I think a lot of, and then also like just your business operations, sales rhythm, it's going to be really distracting for a founder. So the more operations people you can get plugged in, the better. If you have an M&A specific attorney that focuses on this stuff, great. That's going to save you a lot of time and effort because that could be a whole different part of diligence that takes a long time. And then from there, wrapping up and closing is relatively simple compared to the rest of the process, right? I think diligence is usually painstaking for most small business owners because there's just a lot of docs and whatnot to share. So
Sure, sure. And then, we covered the sort of due diligence part, and so in terms of the risks when it comes to, transactional and not non-transactional risks, in this entire process, and the challenges, the entire process has, what are those?
yeah, so there's a ton of risks, I think, for business owners, right? So most acquisitions are going to have like two different tiers. So let's say you get it, let's just say figuratively speaking, $1 million for your business. Maybe you get some amount of that up front and then you have an earnout, right? So the biggest risk is be on the earnout side. So you really want to partner with somebody like one you trust, two that you can hit that earnout. I think our advantage, at least how we look at the market, is if I was to buy your business in the RPO space, I know that we as a team could operate it maybe not as good, but 95% good, and definitely better than any private equity buyer that you're going to get, right? So I think that's like a big thing. It's like, where are you going to actually hit your earnout? Because a $10 million offer and a $1 million offer, like the $1 million offer could, in theory, be worth more depending on how it's structured, right? Because the probability of hitting 10 million could be zero, essentially. And so that matters, I think, more when you think about your offers, is making sure you understand the terms and who you're working with, because a lot of earnouts aren't hit because of that.
And in terms of the top challenges, what are those top 2 or 3 challenges that you'd outline, in the process?
I think the top challenge, I mean, just as a small business in this context, is going to be that actually operating the business at a high level while you're going through diligence, right? Diligence will take another, it's a full-time job on top of being CEO of a small business. You're already doing a ton of different things. So I think that's the biggest thing. It's like, focus on the health of the company. If diligence takes a little bit longer, it's not going to kill the acquirer. It's much better that your business is in a better situation. So I would focus there, and then focus on your acquisition second. But I think a lot of founders flip those priorities, and I think it's the wrong way to do it, in my opinion. So.
Right. And then, I have been really keen on, understanding about your journey, because you tweeted this, I think last month, how you've grown the business, in 10 years. So please share the story, Jesse.
Yeah. So Genesis story, I started recruiting, or sourcing rather, when I was 15 years old. I grew up in Silicon Valley. My mother was a director of TA at the time, so I did sourcing and chores to get allowance. Then I went to college. Right out of college, started Job Mobz in 2012, and been doing it ever since, like 11th year, and still having a lot of fun with it. Really not one of the only like larger privately owned, 100% bootstrapped companies in the RPO space that I know of. I think everyone else in the Baker's dozen list is got private equity money. So our goal is kind of just to stay privately owned. I think it's a huge differentiator right now, especially because we're able to just focus on quality. We don't care about profits. We don't have limited partners that we're trying to pay out, or public shareholders to pay out, right? Our focus is on our people, and which benefits our customers, and those are our priorities. The money thing is less important, but that's the quick overview of my background and journey over the last 10 years.
And then you shared some numbers as well on the tweet. How
Yeah.
you hit those numbers?
How do we hit those numbers? It's funny, we're having the conversation about it. So one, like, through strategic acquisition, right? So that's helped us. We've rolled up 2 companies, at least the like RPO sector and service sectors of those companies in the last few months. One of which was smaller, and then the strategic partnership with Recruiter.com, and basically acquiring that services business has helped growth, right? Basically, it's very additive for us. So that's one of the things. But other than that, just focusing on quality and having staying power. The space is very high churn. We looked at like a competitor analysis from 2017 recently, and there's 1 company left on that list. They definitely aren't privately owned anymore, but there's out of like dozens, right? They're all just gone, right? Owners retire or sell, or and so I think if you really want to do well in this space, get in it, have like a North Star of where you're trying to go, and focus for a decade, and you can do a lot of great things.
Definitely. So, scaling through acquisition is one of the avenues that you're looking at as well, isn't it? In terms of, companies approaching you right now to work with you guys, and then, you help them scale. What is your sort of ideal client, or rather ideal, target company that you would want to acquire in terms of the?
Yeah. There's a lot of ideal profiles. So I think we're looking for, again, going back to like the merger piece of like who's has a high quality, high like really well regarded brand type companies, and then companies that are strategically advantageous, right, geographically and otherwise, and different customer bases and segments. So we're looking at something like international acquisitions as well. And yeah, more on that. But I think that's the high level overview. We're looking as a growth strategy, right? This has never been done in the private equity space. No one's rolled up RPOs ever. This is just, as far as I know, I've been in the space for 11 years now. I've never heard of it, seen it. I've talked to other firm and owners that have been really, really successful, and it's just never been done. So kind of in uncharted waters, but I think the same fundamentals apply in private equity roll-ups as they do for RPO. So we're excited about it.
Of course. So this is the time for recruiting businesses. If they want to scale quickly and then grow, obviously you work with a business like yourself to excel from here on and take advantage of the processes, systems, everything. Expertise.
Totally, yeah. It's like if you're acquiring and merging with the right business, I mean, it's 1 + 1 = 3. As weird as that sounds, because of the synergies and growth, right? It's much harder to scale something with just. I was sharing with somebody recently, actually, an owner we were looking to acquire in their firm, and it was that if I was to go start a firm today myself, with all my connections and everything else, it would be really challenging, even if I had a couple people, right? But if I then merge that company into 100+ person company that has everything in place, everything's already built, now you can just start running, right? You can start sprinting. You don't have to do all the laying of the tracks, right? You're just on the on the path taking off, right? As opposed to just trying to lay the path, which is what S&P owners are trying to do, which is much, much harder.
Totally. There's a clear precedence of what's next, and then you already sort of walked through that journey, and then invented the wheel. So that's the better way.
Yep. I know we're coming up on time. Would love to if there's anyone that has live questions, I'm happy to chat about. I've been getting a lot of questions about recruiting recruiters at Job Mobz. I think I had a post last week that got quite a bit of traction for all the hiring we're doing internally, and happy to answer questions if there is any, or just talk about that briefly in closing so folks have information on that.
And I'm sure they can reach out to you on your LinkedIn as well, isn't it?
Don't reach out to me on LinkedIn. I can't. I added another comment. I haven't checked my LinkedIn in a bit. There's just hundreds of messages in the last week, so I can't keep up with everything, unfortunately. But if they email recruiting@jobmobz.com, we will definitely get back to them. Just please put the position in the subject line that you're interested in. We'll make sure that you get contacted or at least followed up with. So, but yeah.
Perfect. Sounds good. So Jesse, thank you very much for being on the Recruitment Curry Show. Really enjoyed the conversation, and good night from India.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.
Cheers.